name in chat. So welcome everyone. Welcome to our second Deeper Dive series. I'm Jennifer Statham. Thank you to our facilitators, Miranda Murray and Jordan Forster. Tonight we're covering Essential Understanding 3. And again, please make sure you sign in on the sign-in sheet. The link is in the chat. I will also be reposting that as well as the resource link. And at the last 5 minutes, I will also put in the renewal unit survey. Even if you are not getting renewal units, please do fill out the survey. We take those very seriously, and we add your feedback to improve every single session. So thank you very much, and take it away, Jordan and Miranda.
Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. We're really excited to be moving on with the second official Deeper Dive workshop here tonight. So I'm just going to get my screen shared here for a moment. I was noticing when I was looking back at some of the recordings, if it's interesting to you that we keep looking off to the side, it works really well for us to have two computers up. So we got the presentation over here and you guys over here. So thank you for joining us. Again, my name is Miranda Murray, Indian Ed for All instructional coach here in Great Falls and co-facilitator for Bright Child Education.
Hello, I'm Jordan. Today's afternoon presentation is brought to you by Red Bull. I don't know how many renewal units they are offering you for this course, but I will double them if you honestly get us a sponsorship from Red Bull. Anyways, thank you so much to OPI for having us. Thank you especially for everyone who's joining this class. We really appreciate your time and we appreciate your interest in these topics. The Essential Understandings webinar series, the Unpacking, is meant for kind of deconstructing the meaning behind those 7 essential understandings. They are written at a collegiate level, and we are educated people, but at times, if you're not familiar with the concepts, you read through them and you can kind of be like, what? So that's what the webinar series is for. And then the Deeper Dives is more focused on getting into lesson plans or activities that you could do with your classroom or your community if you are in charge of operating a space. And everything that we have to show you through those webinar series and also tonight in the Deeper Dives is meant for you to take, and you can differentiate in whatever ways make sense to your class or your community or your space. So don't feel like you have to exactly replicate what we're doing to get it perfect. It's just whatever makes sense for you and whatever makes sense for the people around you. But we just want to thank you and welcome you. And we hope that you can take away some stuff tonight.
All right, with that, we're going to be following kind of a similar format throughout these Deeper Dives. So we would like to share with you our featured game for the evening. That's an excellent thumbnail. We've embedded these videos a little bit differently this time. So I'm hoping from the YouTube side of things that it will play a little bit better for you.
This should be our profile picture though.
Hello. So tonight's game we're going to feature is called Dice Game, sometimes referred to as Hubbub. And this game originates with the Cree tribe of Montana. And the supplies you need are some sort of small rocks or beads or objects. I have some small wooden beads here and a plate or a bowl or something shallow that we're going to be shaking these in. We have marked these wooden beads with X's and O's. 2 of them have X's and 3 of them have O's, and the other side is blank. And this is for our point keeping system. There are many ways that you can keep points in this game. I like to start out when teaching this game with the simplest of points, which means that when I land with my shaken dice, the amount of maybe circles I have up gives me points, or the amount of X's I have up gives me maybe 2 points. Doing something simplified is a lot easier. There are more complicated versions of the game where different combinations mean different things, and you can make those accordingly. So now I'm going to shake my dice and I'm going to give myself the points awarded when my dice have landed. So I might toss them up in the air gently, I might shake them. You'll find with younger kids, you might want to have them pick up the dice and roll them in their hands and land it on the plate. And when I've done that, I have 4 marked sides up, so I will give myself 4 points. And then Jordan will take her turn, and we can play to a set amount of points to see who gets there first to win. or you can see who can get the most amount of points in a certain amount of time.
How many points did I get?
You got
4
points.
So we're tied?
Yes.
Okay.
Alrighty, so as you can see, we really enjoy. I think that there was maybe still a little bit of lagging, so I've got one more idea for next time to see if we can't get that to go away for you. But dice game is a great game to play and adapt to the age level you're working with. You can incorporate a lot of math with this, and then you can incorporate other more complicated systems of the combination of symbols. So for example, you can make a chart. So if you get 1 0 and 2 X's, that might equal 1 counting stick or 1 point if you have a tally sheet, or other combinations of blank sides and marked sides. So your students can even kind of decide what works for them, how they enjoyed playing that game as they go forward.
And so for younger kids, you could also take this and graph with them. You can graph and keep track of points, or simply they can keep score by counting if you have those real young kiddos. Older students can use this game to predict probability. That would be a really great math lesson. And all of these games that we feature on the deeper dives, they're not only just an opportunity to win, but they're also an opportunity to demonstrate sportsmanship and also, you know, being a humble winner and also being a humble loser.
Yeah, really important skills to have. Also on the Indian Education for All OPI site, there is a traditional games unit that also has more detailed directions for some of these games that we're featuring tonight or throughout the series. Next, we would like to share with you our contemporary featured person. Some of you might recognize this face. This is Mandy Smoker Broadus. Mandy is an enrolled member of the Assiniboine and Sioux tribes of the Fort Peck Reservation, and she has nearly 20 years of experience working towards social justice, equity, inclusivity, and cultural responsiveness, particularly in the realm of American Indian education. She has served at the tribal college, K through 12, and state education agency levels across the state of Montana. And as one of the former directors of the Indian Education Department for OPI, she has also led the state's Indian Education for All work that currently serves as a model for other states seeking to include American Indian identity, culture, and history in their educational systems. Mandy's also passionate about developing culturally responsive systems that meet the needs of all students. She believes that honoring students and their families and their communities is a necessity, and that stronger, more authentic community outreach, as well as youth empowerment and youth development, are necessary components of closing achievement gaps. Some of her most notable recognitions include, most recently, 2019 being the Montana Co-Poet Laureate. And in 2016, she received an appointment from President Barack Obama to the National Advisory Council on Indian Education. And in 2015, she received the National Indian Educator of the Year Award from the National Indian Education Association. You can access many of forms of her work online and through her book, Another Attempt at Rescue, as you see on the screen. She is also featured in the OPI resource Birthright, which we've talked about before and will continue to talk about here in a little bit, which is named for one of her 3 featured poems in the collection. Something really helpful about this resource, I find, is the guides that come after each poem. There are teaching guides in there that have great leading questions, ways to analyze, questions for further discussion, and talking about denotation and connotation. So a really great resource to utilize poetry in your classroom.
Something that I want to say about Mandy, and part of a larger conversation as to why we're being really intentional about featuring a contemporary American Indian person, is because I never heard about Mandy until I was in college, and I attended a course called Montana Writers Live, and she came and she shared our poetry with us. And something that was just, you know, really changed my life is, until I met Mandy or I heard about her as an American Indian person, it never occurred to me that I could use my experiences and I could do exactly what I wanted to do with my life. I it occurred to me that I could become a teacher, but it never occurred to me until I met Mandy that I could become a teacher of American Indian Studies. And it occurred to me that I could be a writer, but it never occurred to me that I could write about my life experiences and my culture, and anyone would ever be interested in that. And the unfortunate part about that is it took me going to college, attending college, to find out about Mandy and to find this role model and this mentor that I now have in my life. And so I don't think that students should only be privileged to this information once they get to college. We really want to encourage everyone to expose students, Native and non-Native, to contemporary American Indian people, because it's really important to know from an early age that you can do what you want with your life, and it can revolve around culture, and it can revolve around American Indian education. Had I not gone to college, I wouldn't have known that when I did. And so we just want to encourage everyone to be showing as many contemporary people as you can to your students, so they have access to this information as early as possible. Yeah. All right. So speaking of birthright, I'm going to give everyone a couple moments to read this poem. But first, as Miranda was talking about, birthright comes with the lessons concerning denotation and connotation. So before you jump into this poem, I want everyone to keep in mind that the setting is contemporary. It's Flathead Salish Reservation. The themes include cultural and personal loss and survival, love and friendship. And then the topics are relatives, elders, education, and place. So I'm going to give you guys a couple moments to read through this poem, and then we can debrief and discuss how you can use it in your classroom. Also, feel free to respond in the chat, anything that stands out to you, any cultural themes that you're seeing or reading, anything that you find interesting about this poem. Thank you for sharing that with us, Betty. So with students, when you are reading poetry, it's always good to read a poem, check for understanding, discuss, and then reread. Poems are one of those things that certain aspects, you learn something new, or you pick up on something new every single time that you read it. Similar to movies or a book, you might experience things if you have a different outlook on it. So you can also use the DICE model and have students respond to the prompts of anything that disturbs you, anything that interests you, anything that confuses you, anything that enlightens you. And this poem and other poems, again, can be found in Birthright. And they're not simply for English class. They have a lot of historical events interwoven in them. A lot of federal policy can be found in the poems within Birthright. For instance, what policy is making it difficult to say the word scraper? So in this poem, the author is saying that the word scraper is difficult to say with a Salish tongue. That, from a historical perspective, you can have a conversation with your students. What federal policy has made it difficult for this language to be maintained, or this word to be spoken? And this is a great poem that demonstrates what we have been discussing, along with essential understanding 3 scientific knowledge and traditions passed down, while displaying culture and education and how it's still relevant today. I did something similar with my students along with an activity. And that was during a summer session, we focused on a poetry unit, and we went to Belt Creek, and students took pictures. They also journaled what they saw, what they heard, what they smelled, tasted, and touched. And then students watercolored what they observed. And then they also wrote a poem on top of that watercolor. So that's what you are seeing right now. During that trip, we collected materials such as willow, and we brought them back and we used them to make traditional games like Ring the Stick. But we also discussed traditional uses of the willow, and we also offered tobacco for our taking. It's important in culture to offer reciprocity anytime you are asking or taking something, to offer something in return. So we offered tobacco during that trip. But I just wanted to show everyone an example of poetry. And the best thing about poetry that I always tell my students, because they kind of freak out every time I tell them that we're doing it, is poems don't have to rhyme. And I think that's a really great thing about Birthright, is most of the poems in it don't rhyme. I know that traditionally students think of poetry being perfect and articulate, but poetry is really anything, and really anything that you make meaning out of. So just wanted to show everyone an example of that. Are we taking a virtual tour of Birthright on OPI?
We can do that. So I am going to go to a new screen here. We just want to make sure that everyone can see and knows how to access, because some of the questions we get sometimes, it's very helpful to know that you can find all of these resources on the Indian Education for All website, because there are so many valuable resources. Sometimes it's actually really overwhelming. So when you go to the main page, you're going to go under educators and go over here to Indian Education. And then we will scroll down to Indian Education for All. I kind of go through this with teachers sometimes and just kind of make them practice looking for where to go. Because then you're in the habit, next time you think about it, then you can find it. You go into the resources, we will go into language arts. And I think that Birthright, we'll look in the high school here. It's listed probably in many grades, but if you go to Birthright Born to Poetry collection, you can access this as a PDF. Some of your curriculum libraries might actually have this in book format as like a bound book that's printed, because it's quite extensive. But if you're just looking for certain pages, or you don't have access to the printed version of that, you can certainly access it here as a PDF. So this is a really great resource, and I'll just scroll down really quickly to one of the pages so that you can see when we're talking about each author is featured with their photo, a little bit about them. And then after each of their poems, you can see that there's all of these great guides for discussion after each poem, and even sometimes some words from the poet themselves.
And also, it's important to remember that even though Birthright is listed as grades 9 through 12, it can be very easily applicable to lower grades than that. And also too, when you go on the website, the OPI website, when you click on grade on some of the lower level grades, you can find references to Birthright as well. So please don't think that Birthright is only applicable to high school age. A lot of those poems are also applicable to lower grade levels too, just based on what you're talking about or what the conversation is in your classroom.
And tying that back to essential understanding number 3, contemporary poetry is a really great way to share that culture being alive and well, and practices evolving over time.
Yeah. So someone commented that the poems can be well paired with songs as well. Exactly. Like I was saying, you can also pair a lot of these poems in a historical context when you're talking about federal policy. Also, when you're talking about science, there's a lot of cultural stories in there concerning how they use specific things and scientific knowledge, science-based. So these poems pair nicely with almost anything. And you know, kids really connect to that too. They would much rather read a story, and poems really satisfy that, the storytelling aspect of it as well. And so really easy connections with all sorts of content standards and curriculum.
So next we want to kind of revisit some of that essential understanding number 3, talking about the vocabulary that we find to be pertinent to sharing with your students.
Hi, so we are back for Essential Understanding number 3, and we are going to share some vocab with you that we feel is important to incorporate when you're talking about these concepts. Again, these vocab words aren't words that should be a surprise or that are new. They're very much a part of content standards already, especially with social studies, so they should be pretty easy to just naturally infuse with the conversations that you're already having with your class. Ideologies. The understanding of how the world works or should work.
Persist, to continue, or to continue on despite hardships.
Oral history, speaking and sharing information, instruction based on survival or moral conduct. The majority of information concerning American Indian people was passed down by using the oral tradition or oral histories.
Spirituality, a human's worldview and understanding concerning how we should behave and our moral code. It's important to note that this is not the same as religion. Spirituality can often refer to the interconnectedness a person feels.
Religion. An established belief, usually in a controlling power. This usually follows one leader or creator. This is not the same as spirituality.
Discovery, finding something in the course of a search. Although the continent was not new to Indigenous people, it was new to Europeans. How we talk about this with kids is that we ask questions like, how can you discover new land that's already been occupied, especially occupied by civilizations of people?
All right. So just kind of to review that one of the ways that we want to make sure that we're incorporating language all the time is that it's ongoing and a part of what your daily conversations are. A lot of times you'll find these vocabulary words in other areas of your curriculum, and reinforcing and making those cross-curricular connections for your students, super important, really beneficial for their learning, and just introducing that language constantly because like, for example, we're going to be talking about culture here in a second, and those kinds of words are maybe not something that all of our students understand or know or are familiar with. So we want to be constantly introducing those ideas.
Yeah, and those words don't necessarily mean the same thing for all groups of people. So it's important to incorporate them from an Indigenous perspective as well, especially when you're talking about things like discovery. I know that that word doesn't mean the same thing to all groups of people, but you're trying to offer some ideas and conversation starters for your students or your space where you can continue these throughout the year. So I've mentioned before that we take the vocab words and we turn them into flashcards. I also have a word wall in my room that if we have extra time in class or in between the goings on, I just point to a couple words and have students repeat to me the definition of it. And it's the idea that this is a continuing conversation throughout the year. You're always incorporating little pieces of IEFA. You don't have to freak out and get worried about, oh, I didn't do a lesson. It's really conversational based and that growing continuum. So as we just try to be as helpful as possible to naturally infuse this conversation throughout the year.
All right, so if you'll remember from last time when we talked about how culture is like a tree, I want to talk a little bit further about how you can incorporate that as a lesson in your classroom. Explaining it in and of itself is something that is introducing language, you're introducing vocabulary, you're going to be talking about new concepts for students, but you can take that a little further and make it more activity based. So I have two different examples of ways that you can talk about this with students and use this to get to know your students more, because IFA is for everybody. So we really want to make sure that our non-native students or just all of our students can understand what culture means and how it pertains to them. And sometimes that takes a little coaching on your part. I've done different projects where I've talked about traditions, for example, and I always have kids that say, my family doesn't have any traditions. And so helping students to understand that their definition of a word doesn't mean that they are not included in that. So a lot of times students that say that they don't have traditions, for example, they say, well, we don't have any foods that we eat that are tied to culture, or we don't have any certain celebrations. Maybe they don't have a great family dynamic, so holidays aren't something that they're going to bring up as a good tradition. You can also talk about other ways that culture is incorporated, and it has to do with things that individual families or family units do together, and that might look different for different kids. So one of the things that I put this in your resource folder as an example of a way you could take this project or this idea a little bit further. Both of the ideas that we're going to talk about here in a moment utilize a planning sheet, because I think sometimes if we don't set kids up for success in planning out kind of their ideas or their thought processes, we're not going to have as good of an outcome on the other parts of these projects. So I made this planning sheet and just gave some examples. This would be something I would utilize after we had talked about how culture is like a tree and had gone through some examples. And then I've listed some of those examples on this sheet. So this sheet would be something that we would have looked at together. We would have talked about examples and really set kids up for success in kind of figuring out ways they can apply this to themselves. This is really important because sometimes when we get down to those other more hidden aspects, when we talk about like holidays and celebrations or traditions, again, students are going to come up to you with like, I don't have any of these. And you're going to have to be able to talk to them about how that might look different for them. One of the examples I used when we were doing a project with traditions is I just had a conversation with the student. I said, what is something that you and your family do on a regular basis? A regular basis could be once a week, once a month, once a year. We often think of holidays and ceremonies and things when traditions come up, but a student might not have that. So then they might say, well, we play games every Friday night and order pizza. So that's a family tradition. It doesn't have to look so rooted in a specific culture. It can be their own family dynamic. And that's really helping students to understand that culture is a really fluid understanding and a fluid definition and can include a lot of components. So I would go through this sheet with students and give them parameters. If you don't tell them I need 3 to 5 ideas per section, you're going to end up with 1 per section, which won't help them as they go forward. So you want to give them some parameters, some structure, and talk to them about how they can fill this in. The thing that I want to point out and be wary of is as you get further down, you're going to be wanting to talk about examples that are things that students are wanting to share. When we looked at the culture as like a tree example during the webinar, we talked about how the roots can sometimes include life experiences or trauma or worldviews or politics. And some of those things aren't going to be appropriate for your students to be asked about or to share. This is all dependent on the grade level that you're working with or grade levels that you're working with and how well you know your students. If you're doing this at the beginning of the year, you're not going to want to ask them those deep questions yet because you don't have that relationship established with them. So really thinking about how can we navigate this in a way that's emotionally safe for our kids. We're not wanting to bring up traumatizing events and give them space to be able to talk about this. So when you guys participated in the discussion of how culture is like a tree, there was lots of really great examples in there that gave other alternative ideas for including this roots aspect. So some people talked about how family is really a part of our roots because we might be steeped in our family's identity and our family being together. But we also talked about, because you kind of have to figure out what's emotionally safe for your kids. So if you're talking heavily about families, you need to make sure that that's something that's going to be emotionally safe for all your kids, because not all of your kids are going to have great family situations. So some of the events or some of the ideas that we put down for examples when you're turning this into a project for the roots is talking about important life events. Now, depending on the grade you're talking about, this might be the day my baby brother was born, or my 10th birthday, or the day I got my driver's license. Important life events don't have to be something bad or big. It could be something small that feels big for that student. We talked about family and ancestors. I think that there's a lot of times in different grade levels where we give students the opportunity to research their family histories. So talking about where they come from, would be a great example to talk about roots. And Jordan had a great idea to add hidden talents, because sometimes you're going to come to a head and students aren't going to have anything to put here. So you could ask them, what's your hidden talent? What's something you can do that no one knows about? And so, I can pat my head and rub my belly in the opposite direction. That might be their secret talent, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be a deep rooted thing. It can be something more surface level like that, if that's what works for that student. So I showed an example on this next slide here. I filled this out about myself, so you guys are getting to learn a little bit more about me. And I filled this out according to how I would show students to fill this out. So they would be able to jot down a couple of ideas that fit each of these boxes. And then you can take this planning sheet and you can really run with it in a couple of different directions. The two examples I'm going to give you are both artistically related. One is a poem. I think that probably a lot of us, especially at the younger level where we have to do structured poems, are ready to be done with the I am poems. So this is a great way to encourage students to share about themselves and getting to go in a different direction. So they can write a poem. This is an example. I used the things I filled out on the previous slide. And I wrote, my culture is like a tree. And so I use those words to describe myself. With older students, you might be able to give them less structure in terms of how they decide this looks in a poem. They might be able to take these ideas and incorporate them into a poem in a different way. They don't have to follow the same structure as this, but you could really take this in a really good direction of getting to know your students more in an emotionally safe way. The other thing, because always anytime I can, I'm going to incorporate an art project, as that is my background. The other thing I incorporated here was a collage project. So this collage uses text as art, writing down those words in the appropriate areas. So having those leaves be written, those ideas from the leaves portion being written on the leaves, the branches, the trunks, and the roots. And so you can kind of take this idea a couple of different ways in different materials. It doesn't have to be a huge long project. It could be something that they draw on a sheet and don't have to get out any other art supplies. So really giving opportunity to you as the teacher to incorporate this in the way that makes sense for your classroom and your time frame, and how well you know your students and how well you want to know your students.
Yeah, this would also be a good surface level of getting to know your students.
Mhm.
And so they could do this assignment maybe at the beginning of the year and then pair up with another student. And that's how they get to know or become more comfortable with the children in their classroom. It's kind of ease in and build relationships that way. That would be an excellent idea. And I think that this would also be a fantastic idea for not just those younger kiddos, but the older kiddos as well.
So in the chat, I want to give you just a moment to tell me about how you feel you could use this culture as like a tree in your classroom. So just give you a couple of moments to reflect on how you might utilize this idea in your classroom, or if we have non-teachers here, because I think some of our participants have been non-teachers, how you might utilize this in the area you're an expert in. I like that idea of building community. Thanks for sharing that. Creative writing, it's a great place to use that. I saw someone saying they did something like this before. I think that there's always some form of poem, especially at the elementary level, it seems, where we talk about who we are. So this might be a new and interesting way to use this. Very nice. I also appreciate seeing the variations of how you take some of the ideas you've learned here and incorporate those into your classroom, or building on to something you're already doing.
Yeah, definitely. Or turn it into some type of a decoration. an explanation. That's a great idea.
Oh, I like that idea of using it in counseling. Ooh, you're gonna have to send me, if you do this with natural dyes from nature, I'm gonna need to see that. That's gonna be a really cool idea. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for sharing your ideas of how you can incorporate this into your classroom. I hope that is a useful resource for you.
Another book that we briefly discussed during the webinar series of Unpacking Essential Understanding 3 is Where Did You Get Your Moccasins? This book is about a boy who brings a pair of moccasins to school. His kukum made him, his grandmother made him, and through oral tradition, he recounts the steps it takes to make them. The students in his class keep asking him, oh, well, where did you get the leather? Oh, well, how did they get the deer? And it's not only a really good example of oral history or oral tradition, is this book also demonstrates the historical and scientific knowledge to harvest, process, and make moccasins, which I think is really important. A lot of times our kids just say, oh, I got it from here, but really understanding how you are able to manipulate the environment again in that scientific way is very important. In the end, it's funny, they ask him, well, where did you get your beads for your moccasin? And he says, this store. And I think that's really great because it demonstrates that cultures evolve and change over time and they adapt as well. And this is a great conversation piece around personal culture and what is important to you and your family. Your students can write a story about something someone older than them has taught them. Ask why or how family knowledge is important. Ask about ways of learning. Do you learn things better when you are shown and get to practice while you listen? Older students can practice descriptive writing techniques or how-to examples. So those culinary arts students or those life skill students can be intentional and write a descriptive recipe and the steps that it takes to make a food or a dish that's important to them or their family. Descriptive writing around fixing a car, beating or sewing, describing objects. A lot of times if I want to do a class warm up, I'll bring just an object out, a graduation cap, and set it down and say, write about this object as descriptively as possible without using the word graduation cap. So someone would know exactly what you're talking about if they were to read this. Also, from a historical or a social studies perspective, a descriptive writing prompt of how does a bill become a law? Those steps that it takes, the process that you have to go through, the communication that's involved in that is very important. And also, or maybe for a gym class, how to play a new sport, the steps that it takes and the rules, the regulations, and the materials that you would need to play that new game or a new sport or a sport that others might not know about would all be great examples of descriptive writing and the steps that it takes to pass down this knowledge, but also gather all of the materials necessary to achieve your ultimate outcome.
One of the things I really like about this book is the kind of rhythm that you can read this in, because it's one of those, it's written in the style where as each step is added, you repeat the whole part of the story and then it adds a new step. And those kinds of stories are really good for kind of understanding and gaining that perspective of
You share, I share, we share.
exactly. Yeah.
Repetition.
It's a really great resource.
For older grades, something that I use in my class as well is the book Counting Coup by Joe Medicine Crow. This is a great supplemental history text as well as English. It's fairly easy read. It's about 127 pages. And it's a first-person narrative about Joe Medicine Crow, who lived from 1913 to 2016, which is really important from a historical perspective because throughout his life, he experienced not only different federal Indian policies, but just major transitional periods up into contemporary times. Joe Medicine Crow was a historian, and his writings include information about reservation life and culture. He served in World War II, and while he was waiting for the bus, he dropped everything to go serve on behalf of the United States when he heard about the bombing of Pearl Harbor. In 2009, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. This book discusses his early years and incorporates a lot of Crow culture and tradition, also his school experiences and his experiences with seeking and achieving higher education, which I think is really important for our students to be able to hear about. This book describes his contributions to the war effort. So he was able, through his experience in World War II, he disarmed an enemy, he touched an enemy without killing him, he led a war party, and he also stole horses. So after he returned from World War II, he told this story to members of his community, and because he completed those 4 acts, he was bestowed the accolade of War Chief for the Crow Nation and ultimately became the last Plains War Chief. Also in this book, it describes how he maintained aspects of his culture during his involvement in the war. So you can discuss with your class how does he keep his culture and traditions intact even in a different country. Students can do a report or write an essay on him and his life. And also OPI has some lessons and information around American Indians' involvement in the wars. American Indian people have fought on behalf of the United States at a higher percentage rate per cap than any other ethnic or racial group in the United States. And I think that's really important information for our students to know. So again, in that social studies section on that OPI website that we took you to a little bit earlier, you can find more information. There's lessons around, they're called the warrior spirit, and lessons also pertaining to this book in particular, but it's something that I really recommend. I think it's important to remember that you can still achieve the same content standards even if you're switching out material. You can still achieve those English content standards, those ELL standards, those ELA standards, those social studies and history content standards. And sometimes it just takes vetting material and engaging students in a different way.
Thank you for sharing that. So now I'm going to share with you a video talking about an OPI resource for Bowwow Powwow.
So another lesson we'd like to feature from OPI's website is surrounding the book called Bowwow Powwow. This is a book resource you should have available at your library in your school district. OPI was gracious enough to send this book out to everyone. And they have supplied on their website a lesson plan that is kind of a unit. It's split into 3 days. You can obviously teach this how it fits for your classroom, but you're introducing the idea of powwows. And this story follows a little girl and her experience at the powwow, and then a dream she has after she's been to the powwow. So what I love about this lesson is that it really is easy to make unique for your classroom and what makes sense for you. There are lots of aspects that are available for teaching essential understanding number 3. You're going to be focusing on how culture is alive and well. Students and even you are learning about powwow together. It gives you a lot of opportunities and resources to give students background knowledge so that everyone can participate in the conversation as you're reflecting on what you've learned in the books and the videos. So this lesson plan asks you to have a journal for the students. There are several writing prompts and drawing prompts throughout the lesson plan. You're going to introduce the idea of dreams before you even get to reading the book. And there's some great leading questions in here. It also directs you to a bunch of really great videos that you can link to your classroom to show. You're going to be able to teach from this book. You'll read this book, students will react to it, they'll have gotten some background. And then there's other books that you can use to enrich this resource. So books like Powwow's Coming, Powwow. These are some books that we've mentioned before in some of our classes. And another book that is a great resource for talking about powwows is Little Duck Poughkeepsie. So when you're doing this lesson plan, I don't want you to think that you have to be teaching this whole unit perfectly, because there are a lot of learning objectives available in this unit. Take the parts that make sense to you and your classroom. Reading the book, rereading the book, asking students questions about what they heard in there, things they might have experience with and might relate to. There's a section in here that talks about introducing language, and the video resource they show with it has students speaking in their native language. The activity that you're going to get out of this is some writing. There's several English standards that are followed in this. This is geared towards 3rd and 4th grade, but you could utilize any of these books for many grades as a way to teach this lesson. I also think that this is a good starting lesson if you're feeling timid about getting started and not having enough background knowledge. This lesson really does a lot of work for you in sharing background knowledge from other resources. So it should give you the confidence to teach this in your classroom.
Is that there's a lot of sorry, I started talking before we were unmuted. One of the things that I think is great about this resource is this lesson plan that OPI has on their website is that it incorporates a lot of outside resources as well. I mentioned in the video that there is a lot of work done for you. So if you're feeling like, I don't know what to say, I'm afraid I'm going to say something wrong, there's a lot of resources there where you can be learning side by side with your students. An excellent idea when you have books like this, where you have multiple books that can enrich one topic, is dividing your class out, setting books out at different tables. And then if you get a large piece of construction paper or cover the table in paper, when students go around, they can choose it. If they're in groups, they can choose one of the students to read the book to the group. And then everyone has to leave a message on that paper about something new that they learned, or something that they liked about that book, or a question that they had. And then you can take those resources, those papers that the class created, and you can use it as a jumping off point for more topics of conversation. Maybe it's information, maybe there's some really good questions that you don't know the answers to either. So you could do some research as a class together. And then they're getting that interaction with all of the resources, learning about one topic from multiple resources and from multiple kinds of perspectives, because one of these books in particular is very photorealistic, and then some of these are more fictional in ideas or characters. And so it's a really great way to incorporate those together.
You can also make other connections too with this book. You might be teaching non-native students who haven't experienced this, so you could have them tell a story about their favorite trip that they've taken or somewhere they went that was special to them. So also differentiating in a way that just isn't specific to a certain group, but also making it meaningful for everybody.
Yeah, there's lots of opportunities in that journal that the lesson has you create for students to talk about their personal experience, their personal questions or understanding and knowledge, and kind of really build on that as a group. And it goes kind of back and forth between something that they can certainly speak about their own experiences. They know everything that they've experienced, and learning about new things. And so that's a really cool idea. I want to share with you one of the videos that's featured in the lesson, and then we will talk about one of the questions that you can use.
Dancers and singers from throughout Indian country gather in Helena, Montana to participate in a last chance community powwow. It is a time for family and friends to come together to share cultural traditions. Singers share their songs, and these songs are an excellent example of the oral tradition in practice. Powwows feature different types of dancing, and the dancers' regalia reflects their specific style of dance, such as traditional and men's grass dance. Powwows are open events, and all are welcome to attend. If you get a chance to attend a powwow, make sure to participate in the intertribal dancing and show off your fancy moves. To learn more about powwows, check out our guide to understanding and enjoying powwows, which is located on our Indian Education website. We would like to extend a special thanks to the Last Chance Powwow Committee for granting OPI permission to record this video. We would also like to thank the dancers who granted us permission to use their photograph. This is Mike Jetty, Indian Education Specialist here at OPI, wishing you a good day and safe travels on the Powwow Trail. Doksha Ake.
One of my favorite things about this video, you might have seen Jordan and I in the corner smiling and pointing out, we recognize some people in this video. My favorite thing about this is Mike Jetty narrating it, because he is such a joyful person. And I feel like he really captures the spirit of powwow and that celebration and coming together, and even just in the tone of his voice. So this is a really great resource. The book that he mentioned in the video, Your Guide to Understanding Powwows, is another one of those PDFs found in that resources tab as one of the common resources for all grades. And it has really great information about all the different kinds of dances, all of the different parts of the powwow, what to expect if you haven't been before. Certainly, if you have personal knowledge and personal experience, that is a wonderful tool to be able to share. So this really, I love all the parts of this lessons, because there's some really good resources and information to share.
And just a fun fact about this. So if you're familiar with the gold rush in the area that would become Montana, you know that the area that the town or the city of Helena that was formed around was Last Chance Gulch. And I just find it particularly clever that this is called Last Chance Powwow, because it's really in our area, the end of the powwow route at the end of summer. And so I think it's just clever that they call it the Last Chance Powwow, because this is your last chance.
Very well named. In the chat, thank you, Jennifer, for sharing that. Jennifer shared, if you didn't notice, that Mike Jetty, when he was at this particular powwow, probably filming and gathering this footage, participated in a switch dance and danced in his daughter's regalia. That's pretty cool. In the chat, I would like you to take a minute to reflect. What did you see in the video that you can connect with Essential Understanding number 3 that will help you share what Essential Understanding number 3 means with your students? So just giving you a couple of moments to make those connections between what you just saw in the video and Essential Understanding number 3. Yeah, also touching on Essential Understanding number 1 and 2, really displaying the beautiful diversity in clothing and participants and tribes that are represented at different powwows. It's a great example. Showing traditions and cultural practices, contemporary practices. Yeah, I think it's really important to point out like contemporary modern examples. I know that we keep using that word. It's really important, especially to Essential Understanding number 3. But over time, as you've participated with us, we've been kind of talking about like what perspective do people have about American Indian people? What's the imagery that's out there? And this is a great example of showing contemporary in color. I love the photographs and the portrait style photographs that are sprinkled throughout that, because it really demonstrates the joyfulness that is there. I really like to see the families together and the smiling and those contemporary colored photos.
Excellent. Thank you very much. No, that's okay. Here's the thing about the Essential understandings too, it's easy to get them mixed up because there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
They kind of flow into each other at certain times. So it's totally okay and understandable that you would get them mixed up sometimes because there is that overflow and overlap. They really tie into each other well. So
yeah, and the more you get into this, the more you become familiar with this, that's going to be a really strong point for you as a teacher or as an educator when you're getting to work with students, and you don't have to stop and differentiate those different parts. You can talk about them interchangeably. It's really a great way to share that with students, because then you're getting a multi-layered understanding of what Indian Education for All is really all about. All right, thank you for participating in the chat. We love to see your guys' ideas and understandings and what you have to say.
before we begin, I need to say, in my most humble opinion, I don't think I've ever looked so beautiful as I do in this still shot of myself. And I'm sorry that I'm not being super humble about that, but wow, breathtaking.
So normally,
Breathtaking.
I'm just going to take a sidewalk here really quickly. Normally when we upload videos to our YouTube channel, they're public, and so I have to pick out a thumbnail and whatever. Since these are just used for your guys's classes and they're not public on our YouTube page, they're private for these classes, I don't pick a thumbnail. So this is what YouTube decided was the best thumbnail for this video.
Thank you, YouTube. But I know that I'm among friends, and so I know that you guys, won't post this later on the Facebook.
All right, so here we go, talking about another OPI resource. Potentially.
So something that I love to use as a resource, and also located on the OPI website, are the Blackfeet astronomy and Crow astronomy sky stories. What I love about these is that there's a resource guide. The worksheets are already made for you as far as asking questions. And what I really appreciate is the level of science that is involved with these lessons when you're talking about astronomy with your students. So you can also go to the YouTube channel and your students can listen to these stories. We do all sorts of things with these stories. We have students sit and listen, and we check for understanding. We have the students retell the stories. But the idea is, along with Essential Understanding 3, is that culture is alive and well. You do not exist for thousands of years without knowing what you're doing and understanding the scientific world around you. So we have doctors, we have healers, we have astronomers. That's how American Indian people kept track of the seasons, is with the skies and the stars. And it's just really important to solidify with our students that there was scientific knowledge occurring before. Also, the sky stories are just really fun to listen to. So a fun activity that we do with our students after we listen to some sky stories is we create our own galaxy. And we do this by taking a 5x7 piece of cardstock. It has to be cardstock. If it's just regular paper, once it's in the salad spinner, it'll fold in on each other and it doesn't work out very well. So we put that in there and make sure it's stuck nicely. And then we add acrylic paint, whatever colors you want to use with your class. We put the salad spinner lid on it. What I love about the salad spinner is that the paint doesn't go everywhere. You don't have to worry about it because there's a lid protecting you and the other people around you. So salad spinners are different, also found at your local Bed Bath & Beyond. There's some pull ones, there's some push ones, but just make sure it's a large salad spinner like this. And when they come out, they end up looking like this. Now, we've had students just create their own galaxies. We've had students create their own galaxies and write a story about how that galaxy was formed. After we listen to a couple of the stories about the moon or other planets, we have students add planets to it. Whatever you want to do, but it's just a really fun tactile way to get your students engaged and interested in the content.
Some really great stalling points.
What you couldn't tell from the video because it was lagging, and we apologize about that. We're going to do our best to fix it for next time. But what you couldn't tell in the video is I was really going to model it for everyone. And the people that I live with in my classroom didn't clean it out the last time. So when I put the lid on it to pull the string, it wouldn't go anywhere. You couldn't tell that because the video was lagging, but it's kind of funny because I have betrayers among me. So something else that I want to add when we're talking about constellations is you can use that activity as a background and then have students actually graph out or map out specific constellations too in relation to those stories or whatever it is that you're talking about.
The other thing I wanted to add, and you can find this when you go locate that PDF in the Indian Ed for All resources tab. Under the science section, you can find the Blackfeet and the Crow astronomy PDFs. There's really great information in there of talking about time of year, because for certain aspects of culture, star stories being one of them for these tribes that we're sharing with you, it's only appropriate to share those kinds of stories during certain times of year, normally winter time. But you can read up on that and see when you can share that and when it's best for your classroom. I really love to share the videos, which is on OPI's YouTube channel, because kids always love to listen to someone other than you speak. So then there's someone else talking, but they're really relaxing. There's like a star galaxy scene happening on the YouTube video. I like to turn out the lights, even encourage sometimes if students need to really engage in the listening portion, since there's not a lot for them to be looking at, they can utilize that oral tradition practice. Sometimes I have them put their heads down so they can really just hone in and listen to that story. And it's really cool how the kids connect with it. And they love this art project. They can't get enough of the salad spinner.
Well, we use the salad spinner all of the time for a lot of other things too, but and we'll continue that conversation through more of our deeper dives of how it can be used. I can't take credit for it though. My class and I went 2 or 3 years ago to the art museum, and they had us just make those as a piece of art. And I was like, we're going to do this all of the time. So again, sold at your local Bed Bath & Beyond. I recommend the pull string one, but the push one will work just fine. Just make sure it's the large one. And then don't forget that you must do it on cardstock. If you don't do it on cardstock and you just do it on regular paper, it will fold in on itself and there will be lots of tears. No one has time for tears during their day.
Paint and paper mess.
No one has time for tears. Why are you showing? Okay,
Sorry, I had to go to the next screen.
Miranda can't get enough of that. Still shot on me. Okay, so I'm going to lead you through what will be our last activity before we wrap up. And it's what I call, what is your favorite cartoon activity? So I'm going to literally show you guys how I do this. And so I'm going to ask you to respond in the chat to a couple of questions or a couple of prompts that I have. And this is how I introduce it with students. So I ask them, what is the purpose of storytelling? So I'm going to ask everyone, what is the purpose of storytelling? Yeah. Excellent. Varied answers, but really just passing along information. The reason that you tell a story is because you are sharing specific information to someone. So the high schoolers, I'll be like, what's the point of your Snapchat story? Oh, because you need to share with everyone what you're doing right now. Okay. So yeah, I'm just passing along that information. I discuss with them, I revisit those aspects of civilization that we discussed during the webinar series and during the unpacking, those aspects of civilization. So the government, social hierarchy, really emphasizing the importance of story keepers in education, religion, economy, and then that written language, and relate it back to the story keepers. Is it necessarily important for a society to be writing everything down if they have people in their social hierarchy in charge of keeping care of those stories? I have my students think about and possibly share what is their favorite cartoon. So I would like you to please respond in the chat. What is your favorite cartoon? What is the message? Why do you like it so much? I usually share a picture of Dory from Finding Nemo. She's that's one of my favorite cartoons, and the message that Dory shares is to just keep swimming, just keep swimming. But for copyright purposes, I cannot show you the picture of Dory, so just imagine her little face in your head. What is your favorite cartoon? What is the message? Everyone's got problems, right? This is a great way to introduce this lesson to your students too, because it allows them to put themselves in the situation. Everybody likes cartoons. Almost everybody has a favorite cartoon. Why do you like it? What's the message? What do you connect with? Emperor's New Groove, importance of character and relationships. Right. Excellent. So then I asked my students, when you are watching your favorite cartoon, is there more than one message, or could someone get a different message? If a different viewer other than yourself was watching the same cartoon, could they get a different message? Yeah, perspective's important. Yes, they could get a different message. The reason that I start out with a cartoon activity, when we did the unpacking series, we talked about what is the message of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You can certainly relate that to them as well. I've been told that more often than not now, a lot of students don't really connect with Goldilocks and the Three Bears. But when I asked this question, I've never not had a student in the classroom not know what I was talking about. So I asked them, what is the message of Goldilocks and the Three Bears? And always there's different answers. And then I ask them, why did we get different answers, relating it back to that perspective. I also remind them that whatever message is for you, the message that you were meant to hear is the message that you take away. So there's no right or wrong answer necessarily to Goldilocks and the Three Bears or their personal favorite cartoon. Whatever message they connect with, that's the message that's important. I also discussed the legitimacy of messages. And in relation to these cartoons, we don't argue over the logistics of these cartoons. We don't argue over the logistics of a little girl breaking into Bear's house and the bears can talk. These other things, we don't argue about whether or not fish can talk in Finding Nemo. We tell our children these stories, or we share these messages with our children because there's value and learning lessons in them. It's also why we read novels today, especially dystopic novels or fiction novels. There's always a lesson in them. There's always a message that you can take away. Values and morals are an important part of our identity and also our worldview. That's what we meant by religion is not the same as spirituality. Spirituality is more your social construct, your worldview, how you understand the world around you, how you make meaning out of it. So before I read this story that you have on your screen, Brave Wolf and Thunderbird. So I have this whole discussion with my class. We share out their favorite cartoons. Why do you like it? What makes you connect? What's the importance of messages? Reminding them to stay away from discrediting certain messages because there's value in all stories that we tell. Before reading this story, I asked students to listen for the message, and then we'll possibly share out. I have yet to teach this class, so I teach high school students, and I have yet to teach this class where there's not multiple messages taken away from this story. And so I would encourage you just to kind of, introduce this concept, introduce this conversation. It's always best to have students personally connect. So that's why I ask, what's your favorite cartoon? Lilo and Stitch, a student said that to me 2 weeks ago. I guest taught in an English class at our high school. And someone was like, Lilo and Stitch, duh. And also they can write at the end of it, the message they took away and why they agree with it, why they think it's important message for them to know, and also an important message for our society to share with others. So messages they take away from the story is to be helpful to others, to not give up, to keep trying when things don't work out. always be there for your community, always be there for people who reach out to you and ask for help. And also don't be afraid to ask for help. If you're in a situation that you don't have a solution for, you don't have an answer to, don't be afraid to ask someone else for help if you really do need it. So I'll give you a couple of moments to just reflect and respond how you might use something like this. It doesn't have to be an exact replica, but how might you introduce storytelling or the importance of information sharing with your older students? You'll notice too that Joe Medicine Crow is the author of this book, and he is also the author of the book that I shared with you a little bit ago, Accounting Coup, as well. Teach first. So it's all about stories. And that's common too. When I reflect back to my classroom experience as a student, I feel like I learned way more from the relationship building and like the life experience and the storytelling with my teacher, the little side conversations. Absolutely. Those are all great responses. Thank you very much for sharing.
Yeah, I love that everyone's making connections, realistic connections to how these are going to be useful for them. This book in particular also has a lot of great imagery and opportunities to talk about different styles of art and collage and kind of, working through. This is a great book to do that thing where you read it without listening or without seeing the pictures and ask them, what do you think a Thunderbird is? Because a lot of our students might not have a visual understanding for what that is. So this is great.
My class just finished the book Hatchet as well. That's so funny.
Oh, I love that idea, talking about how stories can help us remember information better. When you have a context to the information you're learning. We know that there's lots of learning devices that have to do with memorization, having to do with stories being successful in learning that information. So that's a great way to demonstrate that to your students as well.
Mm-hmm. It's also important for those older students to reiterate that a lot of times American Indian stories have the preface or the context of legend or myth in them when they're being referenced. And it's important to remember that when you have that word phrase together, a lot of times American Indian stories are discredited or devalued. But if you can relate it to the favorite cartoon or their storybook or a message, kind of have that conversation about, well, we don't do that with our cartoons that we watch today or our stories that we tell today. So also we shouldn't do it to these oral histories or these oral traditions and stories, because their messages carry just as much value as the stories that we continue to tell our children today.
Yeah, great comparisons, great ideas. Thank you for sharing that in the chat. I hope you guys are remembering to kind of read back at some of the other people's answers to see what someone else might have an idea that would really work for you as well. Okay, before we close out, we're going to revisit our device from last time about the quick and easy way to remember the essential understandings. So I'm going to give you a couple of moments. If anyone can tell me in the chat, Miranda and I talked about it today. We should really set up a system of like prizes or something. Yeah.
More engagement. Perhaps a salad spinner, but not this time. Maybe next time we'll figure out some prizes or something based on engagement. But can anybody tell me in the chat the words that we associate with essential understanding 1 and 2 as an easy mnemonic device when we're remembering them or vetting material? So what do we associate with 1 and what do we associate with 2? Also, I don't remember is an answer. So if that's your answer, I'm totally okay with it.
Yeah, we've been talking in some classes recently, some other classes we've been teaching, how interesting it is and how much we appreciate from the students' point of view. If they don't remember, they tell us, and adults are not as willing to share that they don't know.
That's okay. It's funny teaching in front of adults too, is because adults sometimes always remain more quiet than students, because adults don't want to be wrong in front of each other, and it's okay. We're not here to blame or shame.
Oh yeah, the buns.
Yeah, buns.
We had hot cross buns.
Oh yeah.
Nice.
Okay. Now everyone's gonna do the class thing when they're like buns. What she
Oh,
said.
yeah.
They already said it. Okay. So
Thank you guys for sharing that.
thank you. Yeah, we're gonna go through it, and as we build through these deeper dives, we will always end out in this way. So as a review, if you would like to take notes, please feel free, but this is how I teach my students how to remember the essential understandings, and this is how I also teach educators to remember the essential understandings, whether it be they're disseminating it to their students or they're vetting material and content that they're going to share with their classrooms. So 1, bun. 1 rhymes with bun. In this case, hot cross bun. So that is our symbol. I made this without any formal art training, all by myself. The summary of Essential 1 is diversity among tribes. The reason a hot cross bun is our signal or symbol for EU1 is because a cross today is associated with religion. Then I asked my students, well, how do we explain this essential understanding to other people? We say tribes differed in religion. To teach religion, tribes spoke different languages, tribes lived in different locations, so they have different resources that affect their practices and traditions and beliefs and governments. Also, tribes have different locations and practices that have different histories, homes, and different uses for things. So 1, bun, hot cross bun. 2, no 2. 2 symbol or signal is no 2. The summary for essential understanding 2 is diversity among individuals. How we explain this to others is individuals differ in appearance, belief, location, and experiences. There are no generic American Indians, just like there are no exact copies of anyone. A lot of the differences and the ways we explain it to others can also be interchangeable with essential understandings 1. All right, 3. Can anyone guess what 3 is? What do we think?
It's
3
already been Easter.
Ah, yeah. Okay.
Guess, Jennifer.
Also, Miranda's a certified art teacher. Hold on. Sorry, guys. Okay. Miranda's a certified art teacher, right? And so she's just naturally good at this, but also I made this without any formal training. So 3 rhymes with tree. Culture is alive and well. When I think of culture, I think of trees. Culture is like a tree because there are parts you see and parts that are less visible. Culture and trees are seasonal. You can see different things in different parts at different times. Culture and trees reproduce. There is transfer of some things or all of the things. Culture and trees are resilient and can withstand everything and anything. Cultures and trees evolve and change over time. Culture and trees can be replenished. So how we explain that to other people, culture goes far beyond the powwows and regalia that are more visible. We still have things like smudging, ceremonies, harvest, games, songs, language, prayer, and much more. So 1, bun, 2, no 2, 3, tree. Then I also take it a step further and I have this document that I create for my students. And so there's a section for the essential understanding and its symbol, the summary of it. So diversity among tribes, diversity among individuals, culture is alive and well. And then also if they were to enter in a conversation with someone or someone had questions, how would you explain that to others?
I really love seeing Jordan's students build on this, because at first when and even as some of you might have just experienced, when you first hear these, you might not have them click in your head right away, but the more we revisit these, the more these things are really going to stand out to you as ways to remember these essential understandings, which are just going to enrich and further your ability to teach IFA in your classroom. But I think it's really particularly important that Jordan often asks them, if you were talking to someone else, how would you explain this? Because the age-old idea that if you can't explain it to someone else, you don't actually know what you're talking about is really something that I think about in my daily life. So I really appreciate seeing the students explain it in their own way. And it's really cool to see how they come up with their understandings of what it means and realize that even if they explain it differently than someone else, they're going to be talking about the same thing. So it really is a very successful tool that I get to see Jordan's students use.
Miranda started that thought out with something that I love to see, and I really thought she was going to finish the sentence with, is Jordan's artwork.
I do. It's growing all the time. It's very good.
I'm a different artist than Miranda. I use like a mixed media. I think it's unfair when artists leave things open to interpretation, but I use a mixed media of a combination of words and trees. You know exactly what is happening when you look at my artwork.
Very clear content. Okay. So now, as we kind of are getting to the end of our time here, we wanted to leave some time for you guys to ask any questions of us. I'm going to put a question up on the screen for those of you that maybe don't have questions in the moment, that you can reflect and respond to this question, which is, how are you going to use oral tradition or history in your classroom or your area if you're not in a specific classroom? So go ahead and respond in the chat with this, answering this question. But also, this is a great time if you have questions for us or just want to share with us some ways that some of the information today is meaningful to you, or if you have other questions, please do that now so that we can kind of interact. We've really enjoyed being able to read and answer questions in the moment in these classes, because I think that's really meaningful. You know, we sometimes take for granted what we know and what we share. There's also so much information to share that sometimes it's hard to narrow it down to these classes with you. So we really would like to be able to answer any questions that you have and hear your reflection on how you want to incorporate oral tradition or history in your classroom.
We'd also like to invite anyone that has a burning question in the middle of the night to email us at brighttrailed@gmail.com. If you wake up and you're thinking to yourself, I forgot to ask Jordan and Miranda this. And if we don't know the answer because we don't know everything about everything, we will do our best to find that information for you and be as helpful as possible.
Really glad to see some feedback on some of those things being helpful to you. I'm excited to hopefully share with us when you do, if you take any of these ideas and utilize them in your classroom, feel free to share with us how it went. Maybe it went really well or went better than I expected. Maybe it didn't go so well. What could we do better to move on? Because that's definitely something we're here to help with as well.
Jennifer, do you have closing out instructions, or is it in the chat right now there?
It's pretty much all in chat. So yes, please feel free to expand on this question in chat. And I will once again post the resource folders. They will be updated each week. And the essential understanding resources are also available there. And yeah, thank you, Jordan and Miranda, for yet another fantastic presentation. And as you read through the comments, I will let you close it out when you're ready.
Sure. All right. Yeah. Kathy, can you give us some more information? You asked, how do we sign into the website? Do you mean for your guys' feedback stuff, or do you mean specifically for the IFA website? To sign in. So any of those links that Jennifer shared in the chat, you should be able to click on those links and they will take you to the sign-in sheet. If you're not able to access that, you might not be signed into your Google.
And don't worry about the sign-in sheet as long as you have put your name in chat. I will be cross-referencing. So as long as you are looking for renewal units, if your name is in the chat and then you complete the renewal unit survey, that's fine. But even if you are not seeking renewal units, please do fill out the feedback. As I mentioned earlier, we take that very seriously and try to address all of your comments. So even if you aren't receiving renewal units, please do fill that out.
Love reading your reflection in the chat. It's great. You guys are coming up with some great ideas. It's awesome.
And please do copy down Jess's information for the Montana Environmental Education Association conference. That's set to be really awesome next month. And Mandy Smoker-Broadus is one of the keynote speakers.
That's awesome.
That worked out.
That was very timely of us to share that with her.
That was, world just has a way of working out.
Well, it looks like everyone has had an opportunity to share how you're looking forward to sharing this in your classroom. Again, please feel free to share with us how it went. We'll look forward to hearing kind of your stories as to how it's going in your classroom. We appreciate you being here. Don't forget to fill out that feedback survey. We definitely, we will wait with bated breath to read those because we really do find them very helpful in making sure we're giving you guys accurate information.
So we just had a question about how do you properly reshare an American Indian story? If those stories are available for you to share, they will come with instructions. And so, for instance, those Montana sky stories, they come with instructions also of when an appropriate time to tell the story is, particularly with the stars and constellations, they're more visible at certain times of the year. And so they will have that information for you. If there's a story that you come across, but you know the tribe, the best advice that I would give is to contact the tribal agency and make sure that you have permission to share that story. But if it's in a book and it was specifically published from that tribe, that in and of itself is giving you permission to share that story. That's a great question. Thank you.
All right. Thank you
Okay.
everybody for joining, and we hope that you have a wonderful evening. We'll see you next time, either at the Essential Understanding 4 webinar, if you haven't already taken that, and definitely at the Essential 4 deeper dives as we move forward.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
everybody.
you. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you, Jordan and Miranda.